What would you do if the stranger who stole your lunch table turned out to be the millionaire who owned your future? Eleanor Hayes was no stranger to hardship. At 38, freshly divorced and rebuilding her life piece by piece, she carried herself with quiet strength. Her safe haven was a small cafe corner, a ritual that kept her steady in a world that often felt unpredictable. But one ordinary afternoon, that ritual was broken by a man with sharp blue eyes, a disarming smile, and a presence she couldn't ignore. His name was Daniel Whitmore. Charming, attentive, almost too good to be true. Their banter was witty, their chemistry undeniable. But Eleanor had no idea that behind his quiet confidence lay a secret that would upend everything she thought she knew about her job, her worth, and the fragile walls she had built around her heart. Was he simply a man searching for connection in a world of power and isolation? Or was he just another figure who could strip away her independence? Stay with us as we uncover a story of betrayal, resilience, and a love that dares to demand integrity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the beginning of Eleanor's unforgettable journey. Eleanor Hayes had never trusted Monday mornings. They arrived too quickly, barged into her life with the subtlety of a freight train, and left her wondering how 2 days of weekend could vanish so silently. That morning, the rain-soaked streets of Portland glistened with the early light. Eleanor buttoned her coat as she stepped out of her modest apartment, balancing a leather satchel on one shoulder and clutching a travel mug that had long ago lost its shine. The air was damp, cool, and carried the scent of wet pavement, an oddly comforting smell for a woman who found peace in little things. At 38, Eleanor was starting over. She had just accepted a position as a secretary at Prescott & Bell, a well-known law firm downtown. It wasn't her dream job; those had slipped away in younger years, but it was steady work with good benefits. After a divorce and a stretch of unstable employment, steadiness mattered. Still, she carried herself with quiet strength. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a simple knot, strands tucked neatly behind her ears. A cream-colored scarf hugged her neck, a gift from her younger sister Clara. Eleanor had a way of looking put together without fussing too much, and people often noticed the calm authority she seemed to radiate even in silence. Her daily ritual began at a small cafe tucked between a florist and a stationery shop. The cafe wasn't fancy, no imported beans, no neon lights, just sturdy mugs and friendly waitresses who remembered names. Yet, for Eleanor, it was her sanctuary. Every day she claimed the same table by the wide front window, a spot where she could see both the busy street and the people drifting in and out of the cafe. The waitresses had come to call it Eleanor's Corner. She arrived a little after 11, during the lunch lull. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of grilled sandwiches and freshly brewed coffee. The radio hummed with old Motown tunes, and a young man behind the counter wiped glasses with the rhythm of the music. Eleanor slid into her chair, setting her satchel beside her. She opened her worn, leather-bound notebook, the one she had carried for nearly a decade. Inside were lists, scribbled thoughts, recipes, even fragments of poetry she had never shared with anyone. The notebook was her compass, helping her organize not only tasks, but also the storm of emotions she rarely revealed. A waitress, familiar and cheerful, approached with a smile. The usual, "Eleanor, yes, please." Turkey sandwich, side salad, and a cup of black coffee. The coffee was always important, not too weak, not too bitter, just enough to anchor her, to remind her that she was steady, capable, and still in control of her life despite all the changes. As she waited, Eleanor gazed out the window. Across the street, a man struggled with an umbrella that had turned inside out in the wind. A teenager skated past, headphones on, oblivious to the world. Life moved in small, messy details, and Eleanor loved observing them. She found comfort in watching other people's ordinary struggles. It made her own feel less heavy. Her thoughts wandered to the job. Being the new secretary was a strange position. On the surface, it meant answering phones, typing correspondence, managing calendars. Beneath the surface, It meant navigating office politics, decoding whispered alliances, and surviving the sharp glances of attorneys who measured worth in billable hours. Eleanor had promised herself she wouldn't get pulled into the drama. She had learned, after years of marriage to a man who thrived on power games, that self-respect was non-negotiable. If she was going to build a life again, it had to be one built on dignity. Her sandwich arrived, neatly cut in half, with the salad tucked to the side. Eleanor whispered her thanks, then settled into her routine: a bite of lunch, a sip of coffee, a note or two jotted into her book. It was a small rhythm, but it steadied her heart. And perhaps that was why she valued this cafe so deeply. It was one of the few places where life felt predictable. The world outside could roar with uncertainty, divorce papers, moving boxes, job interviews, but here, there was constancy. She smiled faintly at the thought. In a world where so much had been taken from her, this table was hers. Yet, as she glanced at the chair across from her, she realized how empty it often looked. She had grown used to solitude, convincing herself it was easier this way. No complications, no expectations, no disappointments, but loneliness had a way of sneaking in between the cracks, settling beside her like an unwelcome shadow. She pushed the thought away. Loneliness was a dangerous companion, one that could tempt her into decisions she wasn't ready for. She had learned to focus on work, on small joys, on the next right thing. Outside, the rain intensified, streaking the window pane. Eleanor sipped her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her chest. She didn't know that this ordinary Monday, the kind she dreaded, would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. For now, she only knew that she had her sandwich, her coffee, her notebook, and her quiet little corner, and she intended to protect it. Because some places, once claimed, feel less like habit and more like home. When Eleanor pushed open the cafe door the next day, the familiar sound of the bell jingled above her head. She shook off her umbrella, slipped out of her coat, and allowed the comfort of routine to wrap around her. Everything was as it should be: the faint aroma of coffee beans, the faint hum of conversation, the warmth that greeted her after the gray drizzle outside. But as she turned toward her table, the one by the window, her sanctuary, she stopped short. Someone was sitting there. A man. He had spread out his own notebook and a sleek laptop, entirely at ease, as if the table belonged to him. His posture was relaxed, yet deliberate, one leg crossed neatly over the other. He wore a charcoal gray suit, tailored so perfectly it was almost distracting, and a simple white shirt with the top button undone. On his wrist gleamed a watch Eleanor instantly recognized as expensive, though she couldn't name the brand. It wasn't flashy, no gaudy gold or diamonds, but it radiated the kind of quiet wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Eleanor felt her chest tighten. This wasn't just about a chair in a cafe. This was her ritual, her one steady claim in a life rebuilt from fragments. And now this stranger had invaded it without a second thought. She approached slowly, hoping he would glance up, recognize his intrusion, and move. But the man was completely absorbed in his screen, fingers poised on the keyboard, ear tuned to whatever thoughts occupied him. Eleanor cleared her throat. No response. She tapped her fingers against the table's edge, just beside his coffee cup. Still nothing. Finally, unable to stand the dismissal, she leaned forward and spoke firmly. "Excuse me. You're in my seat." The man startled slightly, then looked up. Eleanor was struck, not by the interruption, but by the piercing clarity of his eyes. They were blue, not the pale, washed-out kind, but deep and steady, framed by lashes too dark for his light hair. He studied her with curiosity rather than annoyance, as though she had just interrupted a thought that he wasn't quite ready to let go of. "Your seat?" His voice was warm, resonant, and carried the faintest trace of amusement. "I don't see a nameplate." Eleanor's irritation flared. She crossed her arms. "Well, no. But I've been sitting at this table every day for months. Everyone here knows it's mine." The man tilted his head, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Ah, so I've trespassed on sacred territory." "Exactly." "Well then, I suppose I owe you an apology." He closed his laptop with a smooth motion and extended a hand across the table. Daniel Whitmore. Eleanor hesitated before taking his hand. His grip was firm, warm, not lingering, but confident. She met his gaze evenly. Eleanor Hayes. Nice to meet you. Eleanor Hayes, he said, her name rolling off his tongue with a certain ease. I admit, I didn't realize cafe seating was governed by strict territorial law. It is, she shot back, a wry smile tugging at her lips despite herself. And you've broken it. Daniel chuckled, the sound rich and low. Should I expect a fine or perhaps public humiliation? Depends on how merciful I'm feeling, Eleanor said. For a moment, silence lingered. She was acutely aware of how unusual this was. Normally, she avoided conversations with strangers, but there was something about his tone half teasing, half respectful that disarmed her. He gestured toward the opposite chair. Would you mind if I stayed? I promise to observe all local customs from now on. Eleanor narrowed her eyes, weighing her options. The protective part of her wanted to insist he leave, to reclaim her table and restore order. But another part, the one that remembered how empty the chair had looked yesterday, hesitated. Against her better judgment, she slid into the seat across from him. Daniel's smile broadened. So, what exactly are the rules here? Besides not stealing someone's table, Eleanor leaned back, folding her hands on her notebook. There are many. Don't take the last blueberry muffin unless you're prepared for a lecture from the regulars. Don't hog the corner outlet. It's community property. And for heaven's sake, don't complain about the coffee being too strong. That's blasphemy in this place. He laughed, genuine and unforced. Noted, I'll tread carefully. The waitress arrived with Eleanor's usual order. She gave Eleanor a quick knowing glance, as though to say, "What's this, a guest at your table?" Eleanor ignored it, focusing instead on the man across from her. So, she said between bites, what brings you here? You don't exactly look like someone who spends his days in corner cafes. Daniel's expression softened. Maybe I like watching the world go by. Or maybe you're avoiding answering the question. Eleanor countered. Touché. His smile was enigmatic, revealing nothing. Let's just say I'm new in town, figuring things out. Eleanor studied him carefully. Everything about him, from the tailored suit to the quiet confidence in his voice, suggested a man who already had things figured out. And yet, there was an undercurrent of something else. A secrecy. A story he wasn't ready to tell. She decided not to press. For now. Instead, she returned to her coffee, letting the silence settle between them. Oddly, it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt charged, like static in the air before a storm. Eleanor couldn't quite explain why, but she had the unsettling sense that her life had just been nudged off its predictable track. Eleanor wasn't sure what surprised her more, that she had allowed the stranger to stay, or that the conversation was flowing so easily. Normally, she guarded her routines like a fortress. People were unpredictable, and unpredictability had never been her friend. Yet here she was, sipping coffee across from Daniel Whitmore, listening to him laugh at her half-serious explanation of cafe etiquette. So, Daniel leaned back, one arm resting casually on the chair. What happens if someone ignores these sacred rules? A public trial, immediate exile. Worse, Eleanor said, straight-faced. You'll be silently judged by an army of attorneys who stop here on their way back to the office. Trust me, the punishment lasts longer than exile. Daniel chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And here I thought lawyers only fought in courtrooms. Oh, no, Eleanor replied. They fight everywhere over parking spaces, over the best pens, over who gets the corner office with a view. The courtroom is just the stage where they wear nicer suits. It slipped out before she realized it, that dry, candid tone she used when she felt safe enough to tease. Daniel didn't bristle. Instead, he grinned, as though he found her honesty refreshing. And where do you fit into all that, he asked? I'm the new secretary, Eleanor admitted, which means I'm still learning the maze. It's like navigating a jungle full of unwritten rules, territorial boundaries, and political landmines. Daniel's gaze sharpened with interest. And you've already figured out these rules. Some of them, she said. For instance, the third-floor copier, always broken, but don't dare suggest replacing it, or you'll offend the senior partner who claims it has character. And if you accidentally take Margaret Doyle's parking spot, may heaven help you. Daniel laughed again, a rich sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. You make it sound like survival training. That's exactly what it is. Eleanor took a sip of coffee, watching him over the rim of her cup. Think of me as your guide. I could save you from rookie mistakes if you're willing to listen. I'm listening, he said softly. And he was. She could tell. His blue eyes stayed on her, attentive without being overbearing, the kind of listening that made her feel as though her words mattered. Eleanor wasn't used to that. Too many conversations in her life had been one-sided, her ex-husband talking at her rather than with her. Daniel's focus unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. She set her cup down, breaking eye contact. So, what about you? What department did they drop you into for the first time? Daniel hesitated. He shifted slightly in his chair, glanced at the window, then back at her. It's complicated. Complicated. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You either work in litigation, corporate, family law, or support. There's nothing complicated about it. Daniel's mouth curved into a mysterious smile. Let's just say I'm still figuring out where I fit best. It wasn't exactly an answer. If anything, it made her more suspicious. Uh-huh. Eleanor tapped her pen against the notebook, feigning nonchalance. That's the most evasive thing I've heard all week, and I work with lawyers. Instead of being offended, Daniel laughed again. Fair point. Maybe I like keeping some mystery alive. Or maybe you're hiding something, she countered, half teasing, half serious. He met her gaze evenly. Everyone's hiding something. The words lingered, heavier than the banter that had come before. For a moment, Eleanor sensed a shadow behind his eyes, a story he wasn't ready to tell. She shifted in her seat, trying to shake off the sudden weight of the conversation. Well, whatever your secret is, just remember, don't mess with Margaret Doyle's parking space. That's the one truth that'll keep you safe. Daniel smiled again, lighter this time. Duly noted. So, what's your survival strategy? Eleanor Hayes. How do you make it through the jungle? Her expression softened. She thought for a moment before answering. By finding one steady place I can rely on. One corner of the world that doesn't shift no matter how chaotic everything else gets. His gaze flicked toward the table, then back to her. This place. She nodded. This place. Something unspoken passed between them then. An understanding. Daniel didn't press further, and Eleanor didn't offer more. Yet she felt the air shift, charged with something that made her heart beat just a little faster. They lingered over lunch longer than she expected. Eleanor found herself talking more than she usually did, sharing fragments about her childhood in Oregon, her love of books, her belief that people were more complicated than they pretended. Daniel responded with thoughtful questions, as though he genuinely wanted to know her, not just fill silence. It was disarming. Most men she'd met either tried too hard to impress her or dismissed her entirely. Daniel seemed to do neither. He treated her as an equal, someone worth engaging with, not for her title, not for her usefulness, but simply for being herself. By the time Eleanor glanced at her watch, nearly an hour had slipped away. She blinked in surprise. She hadn't lost track of time with someone in years. I should get back, she said reluctantly, sliding her notebook into her satchel. Lunch hours aren't infinite, even for secretaries. Daniel nodded, closing his laptop. Thank you for letting me share your table, Eleanor Hayes. She gave him a sidelong look. Just don't make it a habit. His grin returned, sly and confident. We'll see. As Eleanor stepped out into the drizzle, she told herself not to think too much about the encounter. It was just a conversation, just lunch. And yet, as she walked back to the law firm, She couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel Whitmore wasn't the kind of man who simply wandered into someone's life and disappeared. Something told her this wouldn't be their last conversation. The walk back to Prescott and Bell was short, barely 4 blocks, but Eleanor found herself unusually distracted. The drizzle dampened her hair and darkened her coat, yet she hardly noticed. Her thoughts lingered on Daniel Whitmore, the way he had listened so intently, the evasive way he had dodged her question about his role, the quiet confidence that seemed both natural and carefully guarded. "Don't think about it," she muttered under her breath as she pushed through the revolving doors of the firm's glass tower. It was just lunch. The lobby hummed with the usual post-lunch energy. Paralegals hurried toward elevators, attorneys barked into cell phones, and the receptionist pasted on the polite smile that held the whole operation together. Eleanor slipped past them, swiped her badge at the turnstile, and made her way to the 12th floor. But something felt different. When she reached her desk, she noticed clusters of employees whispering in the hallway. Secretaries leaned against filing cabinets, exchanging wide-eyed looks. Even the usually stoic office manager tapped nervously on her keyboard, her eyes darting toward the conference rooms. Eleanor set her satchel down, pulled out her notebook, and tried to ignore it. But snippets of conversation floated her way, carried on nervous voices that couldn't resist gossip. "Did you hear? A buyout? That's what I'm saying. Some billionaire? Hardly anyone's seen him. Private. Very private. Doesn't do interviews." Eleanor frowned. She caught the gaze of Linda, the secretary at the next desk, who leaned closer and lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "They're saying the firm's been sold." What Eleanor blinked. Prescott and Bell was one of the most established law firms in Portland, its name carved into downtown stone for nearly 60 years. The idea that it could be bought like a commodity unsettled her. "That's the rumor," Linda said, eyes shining with the thrill of being in the know. "Some millionaire out of California. Nobody knows much, except he's young 40s maybe and ridiculously wealthy. Keeps out of the press, doesn't like publicity." Eleanor forced a polite smile, but inside her stomach twisted. The image of Daniel in his tailored suit flickered across her mind. Uninvited. She pushed it away immediately. Coincidence, she told herself. Just coincidence. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of paperwork and tense glances. Attorneys who normally strutted down the hall with arrogance now huddled in corners, whispering about restructuring and layoffs. Some feared for their jobs, others speculated about new leadership styles, and a few seemed oddly excited, as though fresh money might bring fresh opportunities. Eleanor worked steadily, her fingers flying across the keyboard, but her mind wasn't calm. She remembered Daniel's words at lunch. "I'm still figuring out where I fit best." The evasive smile, the watch that spoke of quiet wealth, the way he had looked at her when she mentioned survival strategies, as if he were learning something important. No, it was too far-fetched. She refused to connect dots that weren't meant to be connected. By 3 o'clock, the whispers had swelled into near certainty. A partner strode past her desk, his jaw tight, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice Eleanor listening, but she caught fragments. Yes, the sale's finalized. Tomorrow morning. Announcement to all staff. Her pulse quickened. The rumor wasn't rumor anymore. She rose from her desk, made her way to the break room, and poured herself a cup of lukewarm coffee just to steady her nerves. Around her, the chatter buzzed like a hive. "Do you think they'll cut staff? My cousin worked at a firm that got bought. Half the secretaries were gone within a month. They say the new owner's worth more than most small countries. Imagine answering to someone like that." Eleanor wrapped her hands around the paper cup and stared into the dark liquid. She had rebuilt her life carefully, piece by piece, after the wreckage of her divorce. This job was more than just a paycheck. It was structure, stability, proof that she could still carve out a place for herself. The thought of it being yanked away unsettled her deeply. And yet, a quiet voice inside her whispered a question she didn't want to ask. What if it really is him? She shook her head. Ridiculous. What were the odds that the man who'd stolen her cafe table was also the mysterious millionaire buying her firm? Still, her unease lingered. Back at her desk, Eleanor forced herself into focus, typing up meeting minutes with more precision than necessary. She would not let speculation derail her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same composure she had used to survive everything else. Calm, steady, strong. But as the clock crept toward 5 and employees began gathering coats and umbrellas, she couldn't shake the sense that the ground beneath her life was shifting. That lunch with Daniel Whitmore was no longer just a quirky interruption in her day. It might have been the first tremor before an earthquake. The email arrived just before 9 the next morning. Mandatory all-staff meeting, 10 a.m. sharp, conference hall, attendance required. The subject line alone was enough to send ripples of anxiety through Prescott and Bell. Secretaries whispered in corners, attorneys walked briskly with uncharacteristic tension in their shoulders, and paralegals glanced nervously at each other. Eleanor felt the energy the moment she stepped onto the 12th floor. It buzzed in the air, heavy and expectant, like the static before a thunderstorm. She tried to bury herself in her typing, but her fingers trembled just enough to leave mistakes she had to correct. She didn't want to admit it, even to herself, but a gnawing dread had taken root in her stomach. At 9:55, she joined the stream of employees funneling toward the main conference hall. The room was already packed rows upon rows of chairs, the low murmur of voices, the smell of coffee and nervous anticipation. Eleanor found a seat halfway back, between Linda and a junior associate who tapped his pen restlessly against his notepad. On the stage stood a podium draped in the firm's deep blue banner. Behind it, the projection screen was blank, waiting. At exactly 10 hours, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as Margaret Doyle, the senior partner and de facto leader of the firm for nearly 2 decades, walked slowly to the podium. Her normally commanding presence looked diminished somehow. Her shoulders sagged, and her eyes carried a weariness Eleanor hadn't seen before. "Good morning," Margaret began, her voice steady but subdued. "As most of you have already heard through the rumor mill, changes are indeed upon us. Prescott and Bell has been acquired. This was not a decision made lightly. The legal market is shifting, and in order to secure the future of this firm, we needed strong investment, strong leadership." A murmur swept the audience. Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap, her breath shallow. "It is my honor," Margaret continued, "to introduce to you the new owner of Prescott and Bell, Mr. Daniel Whitmore." The name hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Her vision tunneled, sound dulled, and for one dizzying moment she thought she might be sick. And then he walked onto the stage, the same man who had stolen her table, the same man who had smiled at her across coffee cups, who had listened with unnerving focus, who had dodged her questions with that infuriating smile. Daniel Whitmore. The conference hall erupted into polite applause, though many clapped hesitantly, unsure what this new chapter meant. Eleanor couldn't move. She sat frozen in her chair, her pulse pounding in her ears, as Daniel stepped to the podium with the same easy confidence he had shown at lunch. "Thank you, Margaret," he said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "And thank you, all of you, for being here today. I know change can feel unsettling, even frightening, but let me assure you my vision for this firm is one of growth, not destruction. I didn't come here to dismantle Prescott and Bell. I came here because I see untapped potential." Potential in the company, yes, but more importantly, in its people. His eyes swept the room, calm and deliberate, and then, for just a fraction of a second, they locked on Eleanor. Recognition flickered across his face. Something else. To regret, perhaps, or guilt. Eleanor's stomach turned. Her mind raced back through every word of their conversation at the cafe. The jungle of office politics, the unwritten rules, Margaret Doyle's parking space. He hadn't just been making small talk. He had been learning, gathering, studying through her eyes while pretending to be just another newcomer. Heat rose in her cheeks, a mix of anger and humiliation. She had been candid, even playful with him, lowering her guard in a way she rarely allowed, and all along, he had been the man holding her future in his hands. Over the coming weeks, Daniel continued, I'll be meeting with department heads, learning the inner workings of this firm. My goal is not to disrupt, but to elevate. We'll modernize systems, invest in development, and ensure Prescott and Bell thrives for decades to come. The applause that followed was stronger this time, cautious optimism breaking through. But Eleanor couldn't bring herself to join in. Her palms remained pressed against her knees, her knuckles white. He lied to me, she thought. He let me speak as though I were confiding in a peer, when all along he was sitting in judgment. Linda leaned close, whispering, Can you believe it? He's so young. And did you see that suit straight out of GQ? Eleanor barely heard her. Her gaze stayed locked on the man at the podium. To the others, he was a mysterious billionaire, a savior of the firm. To her, he was a stranger who had slipped past her defenses under false pretenses. As the meeting adjourned, the room buzzed with chatter. Some employees speculated about bonuses, others fretted about layoffs, still others dissected Daniel's appearance like fashion critics. Eleanor rose slowly, her legs unsteady, and made her way toward the exit. She wanted nothing more than to disappear into the anonymity of the crowd. But just as she reached the door, she heard her name, Ms. Hayes. The voice stopped her cold. She turned, and there he was, Daniel Whitmore, stepping down from the stage, weaving through the dispersing crowd with purposeful strides. His gaze never left her. Eleanor's heart thudded in her chest. Every pair of eyes seemed to follow the exchange as he approached her, extending a polite but unmistakably deliberate invitation. "Could I have a word with you in my office?" he asked quietly. Just for her. The room stilled, the chatter muted, and Eleanor felt the weight of 100 curious stares pressing down on her. Her instincts screamed to refuse, to walk away, to reclaim her dignity, but her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her toward the man who had just upended everything she thought she knew. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Eleanor stood stiffly, her arms crossed over her chest, while Daniel Whitmore pressed the button for the executive suite. Neither spoke. The silence was thick, punctuated only by the soft hum of the elevator cables and the ping of each passing floor. Eleanor's mind churned. Anger rose hot and sharp, colliding with humiliation, colliding again with a reluctant, dangerous curiosity. She told herself she should have walked away. She didn't owe him her time, let alone her words. But when he had said her name, when his eyes had met hers in that crowded room, something had pulled her forward, against her better judgment. The doors slid open to reveal a corridor lined with framed photographs of city skylines. The carpet was thick, muffling her footsteps as Daniel led her to a pair of glass doors etched with his name, Daniel Whitmore, Executive Office. He held the door for her. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The office was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a sweeping view of Portland's bridges and winding river. The furniture was modern but understated dark wood, leather chairs, muted tones that whispered authority rather than shouted it. A single abstract painting hung behind the desk, its strokes bold and chaotic, as though mirroring the contradictions of the man himself. "Please, sit," Daniel said, gesturing toward one of the leather chairs across from his desk. Eleanor remained standing. "I'll stand." He studied her for a moment, then nodded as though accepting the decision. He walked around to lean casually against the edge of his desk, folding his arms. "I imagine you're angry." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Angry doesn't begin to cover it." Daniel tilted his head, waiting. "You lied to me," Eleanor said, her voice steady but charged. "You sat across from me in that cafe and let me believe you were just another new employee. You let me ramble about office politics, about people you already had the power to control. You used me." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I never lied. I told you I was new, and that I was still figuring things out. Both are true. Don't play word games with me," she snapped. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You wanted a peek behind the curtain, so you tricked me into giving it to you." He straightened slightly, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor, I could have paid consultants to give me a 1,000-page report on company culture. I could have had investigators follow every employee, dissect every habit, but that wouldn't have shown me what I needed to see. And what's that she demanded? The people, he said simply. The real people, not statistics on a spreadsheet, not bullet points in a PowerPoint deck. I wanted to understand how this firm breathes, what matters to those who work here, what makes them stay, and what drives them away. Eleanor's arms tightened across her chest. So you made me your case study? No. His voice softened. I saw you, day after day in that cafe, focused, steady, claiming your corner like it was the one piece of ground you refused to surrender. I was curious about the woman who seemed both strong and untouchable. When I finally spoke to you, I wasn't looking for secrets. I was looking for honesty. Her breath caught, though she tried not to show it. Honesty you didn't give in return. Daniel's expression flickered, as though the accusation struck deeper than he wanted her to know. You're right. I should have told you who I was. But if I had, would you have spoken to me the same way? Would you have teased me about Margaret Doyle's parking space, or explained the unwritten rules with that wry smile? No. You would have built walls. You would have looked at me the way everyone else does, like a title, a checkbook, a power to fear or flatter. Eleanor hesitated. His words carried weight, and part of her knew they were true. Still, the sting of betrayal burned. So what happens now? Do I just forget that you deceived me? Pretend it was harmless? No, Daniel said quietly. He stepped closer, closing some of the space between them. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just want you to know the truth that our conversation mattered to me, that you matter to me, more than you realize. The intensity in his eyes unsettled her. For weeks she had prided herself on composure, on not letting anyone rattle her foundation. Yet here, in his office high above the city, she felt unsteady. Her voice wavered between anger and something else she refused to name. You don't get to say things like that. Not after lying to me. Daniel's gaze softened, almost vulnerable now. Eleanor, I didn't approach you as an experiment. I approached you because I couldn't stop noticing you. You reminded me of why I wanted this firm in the first place, not for profits or prestige, but for the people who give it life. She turned away, walking toward the window. The city stretched below, oblivious to the storm inside her. Her reflection stared back in the glass eyes, fierce, lips pressed tight, shoulders tense. She hated that part of her wanted to believe him. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Daniel didn't move closer. He simply let the words linger, waiting. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice low. You've built an empire, Mr. Whitmore. You hold the fate of this firm in your hands, but don't you dare think you can hold mine the same way. Daniel's reply was quiet, almost reverent. I wouldn't dream of it. The tension hung thick between them, a rope stretched taut, ready to snap or bind. Eleanor finally turned back, her expression guarded. I have work to do. Daniel nodded, his face unreadable. Then go do it. Show me exactly who you are. Eleanor Hayes. Not because of me, despite me. She didn't answer. She simply walked to the door, her heels clicking against the polished floor. But as she reached the threshold, she paused. For just a moment, she glanced back. Daniel still stood by his desk, watching her with eyes that held not power, not arrogance, something far more dangerous, something almost human. Eleanor shut the door behind her, pressing her back against the cool glass wall in the hallway. She exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, steadying herself against the wave of emotions threatening to undo her. Anger, betrayal, confusion, and beneath it all, a flicker she didn't want to admit to herself. Hope. The days that followed the confrontation in Daniel's office were some of the longest Eleanor had known. She carried herself through the halls of Prescott and Bell with her chin a little higher, her expression carefully neutral, but beneath the surface her thoughts were anything but calm. Every time she caught a glimpse of him in a meeting, in the elevator, passing through the lobby, her chest tightened. Anger flared first, hot and sharp. But then came the second wave, quieter, more unsettling, the echo of his voice telling her she mattered, that their conversation had meant something real. Eleanor despised that flicker of hope. It was dangerous, a weakness she couldn't afford. Late at night, alone in her apartment, she found herself replaying not only Daniel's words but memories she had long tried to bury. The sound of her ex-husband's voice came back in fragments, sharp criticisms disguised as advice. The way he used charm as a mask for control. How he made her doubt her own instincts until she felt small in her own home. He had been powerful, too. Not in millions of dollars, but in the subtle, corrosive ways men sometimes hold power over women who love them. It had taken Eleanor years to recognize the pattern, years to gather the courage to leave. By the time she signed the divorce papers, she had promised herself one thing: never again. Never again would she let a man's wealth, charm, or influence blur her sense of self. So when Daniel Whitmore looked at her with those steady blue eyes, when he spoke words that felt achingly genuine, Eleanor's heart rebelled. She couldn't allow herself to trust not him, not anyone who carried that much power in their hands. Instead, she turned her focus to the one thing she could control: her work. She arrived early, stayed late, and poured her energy into tasks both big and small. She memorized client files, anticipated partners' needs before they voiced them, and streamlined processes no one else had bothered to touch. Within weeks, even the attorneys who rarely noticed staff began to lean on her competence. But Eleanor wanted more than approval. She wanted proof. Proof that she could rise on her own merit, not because she'd happened to sit across from the man who now owned the firm. The opportunity came in the form of a high-stakes case the partners had been quietly dreading: a complicated corporate merger with endless documentation, short deadlines, and a notoriously difficult client. When Margaret Doyle announced the need for someone to coordinate logistics, organizing meetings, preparing briefs, ensuring nothing fell through the cracks, most secretaries avoided eye contact. Eleanor raised her hand. "I'll take it," she said. Margaret gave her a sharp look. "It will mean long nights, and you'll be dealing with some volatile personalities. I understand." Eleanor's voice was calm, resolute, and so she dove in. The days blurred into one another, hours spent poring over contracts, color-coding spreadsheets, arranging back-to-back calls across time zones. She ran on too much coffee and too little sleep, but she kept her focus sharp. Every obstacle became a test she refused to fail. When attorneys snapped under pressure, she answered with composure. When a client berated the team for a misplaced decimal, she smoothed it over with tact. When a deadline loomed impossible, she stayed until dawn, printing and binding documents by hand to ensure they were ready by morning. Colleagues began to whisper her name with respect. Even Linda, once content to gossip, remarked in awe, "Eleanor, I don't know how you do it. You're carrying this whole project." Eleanor only offered a small smile. She didn't do it for praise. She did it for herself. And yet, no matter how hard she worked, she couldn't escape the occasional shadow of Daniel. Sometimes she would look up from her desk and find him watching from a distance, his expression unreadable. He never interfered, never offered help that might look like favoritism, but his presence was there, a constant reminder of the complicated truth between them. One evening, as Eleanor was gathering her papers to leave after a 14-hour day, she overheard two junior associates in the hallway. "Whitmore's been asking about her," one whispered. "Keeps an eye on her performance. Thinks she's his favorite," the other snickered. Or something more. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She wanted to storm out and correct them, to insist that every late night, every careful detail, was her own doing. But instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked past them with silent dignity. She would not defend herself with words. Her work would speak louder. In the weeks that followed, her determination only deepened. The merger case that had once looked like a minefield gradually transformed into a controlled march. Eleanor became the quiet engine behind it, keeping everything moving forward when it should have fallen apart. When the deal finally closed on time, Against all odds, the celebration echoed through the halls. Partners clapped backs, associates cheered, and even the notoriously gruff office manager cracked a smile. Eleanor accepted the congratulations with grace, but inside she felt something deeper than pride, vindication. She had proven, at least to herself, that she could stand tall on her own merits. Still, when she caught Daniel watching her from across the crowded lobby, something inside her stirred. His expression wasn't smug, nor possessive, it was something closer to admiration, and that unsettled her most of all. 3 months passed, and Prescott and Bell was no longer the same firm Eleanor had joined. What had once been a place defined by rigid hierarchy and quiet discontent was beginning to hum with new energy. Daniel's leadership style was unlike anything the employees had expected. Instead of cutting costs and tightening leashes, he loosened them. He invested in training programs, brought in consultants to modernize outdated systems, and quietly funded wellness initiatives that made even the most skeptical attorneys pause in gratitude. The changes were subtle but unmistakable. The endless copier battles dwindled once new machines were installed on every floor. The paralegals, often treated as invisible, now had a voice in team meetings. Even secretaries received professional development opportunities workshops that made them feel like more than background staff. It was a transformation few had believed possible. And though some grumbled about soft management, morale had climbed higher than Eleanor had ever seen. And through it all, she worked. Her success on the merger case had given her a reputation for competence, and with it came more responsibility. Partners sought her input. Colleagues relied on her organization, and her name was whispered with respect rather than skepticism. Eleanor accepted it with quiet pride. She had earned her place, but even as she flourished, she made a point to keep her distance from Daniel Whitmore. It wasn't easy. He was everywhere attending team briefings, walking the halls, sitting in on strategy sessions. He had a hands-on style of leadership, not content to hide behind his office door. But whenever Eleanor felt his presence, she kept her eyes fixed on her work, her voice professional, her demeanor composed. She told herself it was safer this way. And yet, she couldn't ignore the moments. Moments when she would glance up during a meeting and find him watching her not with the critical gaze of a boss, but with something softer, quieter, more dangerous. His eyes always shifted away quickly, as though he knew he had been caught. But the look lingered in her mind long after. At times, she wondered if anyone else noticed. Surely someone must have. But if they did, no one said a word. In a firm that thrived on gossip, it was strangely silent on this matter. Perhaps Daniel's authority protected her from speculation, or perhaps people were simply too focused on adjusting to the firm's transformation. Still, Eleanor felt the tension every day. A silent thread stretched taut between them. She remembered the confrontation in his office, the intensity in his voice when he told her she mattered. She remembered her anger, her vow to prove herself without him, and she remembered, with frustrating clarity, the flicker of vulnerability she had seen in his eyes. It haunted her. One late afternoon, during a quarterly review meeting, Daniel sat at the head of the table while department heads presented updates. Eleanor was there to take minutes, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she captured every word. But halfway through, she felt that unmistakable pull. She glanced up and met his gaze. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. The room continued around them, partners debating, managers presenting charts, but for that moment, it felt as though the two of them were suspended outside of time. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between admiration and longing. Eleanor's breath caught. She tore her eyes back to the screen, typing faster than necessary, her cheeks warm. Afterward, she avoided him, rushing out of the conference room before he could catch her. Her pulse still raced as she returned to her desk, berating herself silently. Foolish, reckless, don't let him in. And yet, that night, as she walked home under the glow of street lamps, she couldn't shake the image of his eyes holding hers across the crowded table. The city air was cool, tinged with rain, but her thoughts burned hot. She had rebuilt her life on discipline, on boundaries, on refusing to let anyone threaten her independence. Daniel Whitmore was a complication she could not afford. And still, some part of her, the part she tried hardest to silence, wondered what it would feel like to stop running from the pull between them. The rain began before dusk and showed no sign of stopping. By the time the city lights flickered on, the streets outside Prescott and Bell glistened with sheets of water, headlights bouncing off puddles like scattered jewels. Inside, the office was nearly deserted. The hum of printers and chatter of phones had long since faded, leaving only the faint buzz of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the old building settling against the storm. Eleanor Hayes sat alone at her desk, papers spread across the polished surface. She was preparing for one of the firm's biggest pitches yet, a proposal to win a major national client. The presentation was hers to assemble, her strategy that the team would deliver in the morning. If it succeeded, it would cement her growing reputation. She rubbed her temples, fatigue pressing behind her eyes. It had been another 14-hour day, the kind that blurred into the ones before it. But she didn't mind. Work was safe. Work was proof. Work was hers. A flash of lightning lit the office, followed seconds later by a roll of thunder that rattled the windows. Eleanor jumped slightly, then exhaled, shaking her head at herself. "Get a grip," she murmured. She was reaching for her coffee when she heard footsteps. Her spine stiffened. No one should have been here at this hour except security and the cleaning crew. Slowly, she looked up, and there he was, Daniel Whitmore, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, walking toward her with the same calm presence that unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. "You know," he said, his voice carrying easily in the quiet, "there are labor laws about working people to death." Eleanor forced a smile, though her heart thudded uncomfortably. "I'll file a complaint with HR." "Oh, wait, you own HR now, too." Daniel chuckled softly, but his eyes never left hers. He leaned against the edge of a nearby desk, arms folded. "I saw the light on. Thought I'd check in." "I'm preparing for tomorrow's pitch," she said briskly, tapping the stack of papers. "It needs to be perfect. I've reviewed your proposal," he said. "It's more than perfect. It's brilliant." She looked away, heat rising to her cheeks despite herself. "I'm not looking for compliments. It's not a compliment. It's an observation." The storm outside filled the silence that followed. Rain hammered the glass. Thunder rolled again. The air between them felt charged, as if the storm had seeped into the room. Finally, Eleanor broke the stillness. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor before returning to her. "Because I needed to talk to you. Alone." Eleanor's chest tightened. She pushed back from her desk, standing to face him. "You've had months to talk." "Why now?" Daniel's jaw flexed. "Because I've spent months trying to respect the distance you've put between us. But tonight, I can't keep pretending." Her breath caught. She steadied her voice. "Pretending what happened between us that first day didn't matter." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. The cafe flashed in her mind, the banter, the laughter, the way she had let herself relax for the first time in years. She shook the memory off like rain from an umbrella. "It was a conversation. That's all. Not to me." His voice was low, steady. "Do you know what it's like to live in my world, Eleanor?" Every handshake calculated, every smile measured, every word weighed for advantage. "I can buy companies, I can sway markets, but I can't remember the last time someone looked at me and just saw a man." His words disarmed her more than she wanted them to. She crossed her arms, gripping her elbows. "You had a choice, Daniel. You could have told me who you were. You didn't." "I know," he admitted, his shoulders dropping as though under a weight. "And I regret that more than you realize. But for one morning, in that cafe, I wasn't a billionaire. I wasn't a CEO. I was just a man sitting at your table, and you treated me like an equal. Do you know how rare that is for me?" Eleanor turned away, staring at the rain streaking down the windows. Her reflection looked back at her, blurred and uncertain. Silence stretched between them, thick with the storm outside and the storm inside her chest. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer. Do you know what it's like for me to have spent years with someone who used charm as a weapon, who twisted power into control until I barely recognized myself when you hid who you were? It felt like that all over again, like a trick. Daniel stepped closer, his expression pained. I'm not him. Eleanor, I don't know that, she whispered. Another crack of thunder shook the windows. Daniel didn't move closer, but his voice carried across the small space. I can't erase the way I handled things, but I can tell you this, I've been alone at the top for a long time. And for the first time in years, with you, I didn't feel alone. That's the truth. Eleanor's throat tightened. She wanted to hate him for his words, to call them manipulation, another tool of a powerful man, but she couldn't ignore the vulnerability in his voice. It was too raw, too unpolished, to be rehearsed. For a moment, she let herself meet his eyes, and what she saw there terrified her more than any lie ever could sincerity. The storm raged on outside, a mirror to the chaos inside her. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the glass, as if urging the two of them to speak the words that had been circling for months. Daniel stood a few feet from Eleanor, his hands loose at his sides now, his carefully composed demeanor slipping into something more human. His voice was quieter when he finally spoke again. Eleanor, I have to tell you the truth. From the very first moment I saw you, sitting in that cafe with your notebook and your coffee, I was drawn to you. I don't know what it was, the way you carried yourself, the calm strength in your eyes, or maybe the way you seemed untouched by all the chaos around you. But I knew, even before I sat down at your table, that if I didn't, I'd regret it. Eleanor's chest tightened. She turned slightly, pressing a hand to the cool window pane, letting the rain-smeared city blur before her. Daniel. Her voice was steady, though inside she was anything but. You don't get to say things like that so easily, not when you're the man who owns the building I work in, who signs the checks that keep my lights on. Do you understand what kind of imbalance that creates? I do, he admitted, without hesitation. And it's the very thing that's kept me silent all this time. I didn't want to make your world harder, Eleanor. I didn't want to cross a line you couldn't uncross. She turned to face him, her arms folding tightly across her chest like armor. Then why now? Because I can't keep pretending, Daniel said, his voice breaking just slightly. Every time I walk into a meeting and see you across the table, every time I catch your eyes in the hall, I feel something real, and it terrifies me. I've built my entire life on control, and you undo that with a single glance. Eleanor's breath faltered. Her heart warred with her head, one whispering yes. Yes, you feel it too. The other shouting no. This is dangerous. This is how you lose yourself again. She steadied herself with a long inhale. Daniel, I won't be another story whispered about in the halls. I won't be the secretary who climbed by falling into the boss's arms. I've worked too hard to be reduced to that. I know. His eyes softened, his voice almost pleading. That's not what this is. That's not what you are. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Eleanor. And I would change anything, everything to make sure the world sees that. For a moment, silence wrapped around them, broken only by the storm. Finally, Eleanor lowered her arms, her voice steadied into something firm, resolute. Then hear me clearly. If this is to be anything at all, it must be on my terms. 4 conditions. Daniel's gaze sharpened, as though bracing himself. Name them. First, she said, lifting a finger, no favoritism. My career will rise or fall on my work alone. No shortcuts, no handouts, no quiet nudges in my favor. Agreed, he said instantly. Second, she continued, her voice stronger, absolute transparency. No more games, no more secrets about who you are, what you're doing, or why. If I'm in this with you, I need the truth. Always. You have it, Daniel said, his tone solemn. Third, Eleanor said, stepping closer now, her eyes locking on his. Professional boundaries. Whatever we are outside these walls, inside them I am your employee and you are my employer. That line cannot blur. Daniel nodded slowly. Understood. And fourth? Eleanor hesitated, her voice softening, her lips curved, just barely, as though the words embarrassed her. If you ever want to kiss me, don't wait for permission. The air between them shifted, charged, electric. Daniel's eyes widened, then softened into something achingly tender. He stepped closer, slowly, giving her space to retreat if she wanted. When she didn't, he reached for her, his hands settling gently at her waist, warm even through the fabric of her blouse. For a heartbeat, they stood suspended, breath mingling, the storm outside echoing the storm within. Then, without hesitation, his lips found hers. The kiss was not tentative, it was certain, full of all the months of restraint, frustration, and longing that had built between them. Yet it was also soft, reverent, as though he feared she might vanish if he held her too tightly. Eleanor melted into it, her defenses crumbling. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel without restraint. The taste of coffee lingered faintly on her lips, mingling with the warmth of him, and for that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Daniel rested his forehead gently against hers. "No more secrets," he whispered. "No more," she echoed, her voice trembling. And though Eleanor knew the road ahead would be messy, complicated, and fraught with risk, in that moment she allowed herself one truth she could no longer deny. She wanted this. She wanted him. The morning after the storm, the office felt strangely brighter. Sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of Prescott and Bell, glinting off polished desks and freshly cleaned floors. But for Eleanor Hayes, the brightness felt harsh, almost accusatory. She moved through the corridors with careful composure, her satchel tucked neatly at her side. Yet she couldn't shake the memory of last night, the warmth of Daniel's lips against hers, the feel of his hands steady at her waist, the dangerous honesty that had passed between them. And though she told herself she would keep it hidden, the firm had a way of sniffing out stories before they were ready to be told. By mid-morning, the whispers had begun. They were in his office late. "Have you noticed how often he looks at her? She's moving up fast, too fast, if you ask me." Eleanor heard fragments as she passed break rooms, caught glances that slid away too quickly, saw lips curve in knowing smirks. At lunch, Linda leaned close, her voice a conspiratorial hush. "People are talking. Eleanor, they think you and Mr. Whitmore." She trailed off, raising her eyebrows. Eleanor forced a cool smile. "Let them think what they want. I have work to do." But inside, her stomach churned. She hated the way rumors reduced everything she had fought for long nights, endless hours, painstaking attention to detail into nothing more than innuendo. She hated that her achievements could be dismissed as the byproduct of a relationship she hadn't even defined for herself yet. Some colleagues were subtle in their jealousy, others were not. A senior associate, red-faced and bitter, muttered loudly as she passed, "Must be nice to have the boss's ear." Another rolled her eyes in meetings whenever Eleanor spoke, as if her words were rehearsed lines fed by Daniel himself. It stung, though Eleanor refused to show it. She had promised herself she would never beg for validation again. Instead, she let her work speak. She doubled down on preparation for the next round of client pitches, arriving earlier than anyone else, staying until the cleaning crew flicked the lights in warning. She produced reports so detailed and flawless that even the most critical partners begrudgingly praised them. When others faltered under deadlines, Eleanor picked up the slack without complaint. When tensions flared in negotiations, she steadied the room with her calm voice and practical solutions. Slowly, grudgingly, people began to notice not the gossip, but the results. Still, the whispers didn't fade entirely. They clung to the air like smoke, impossible to dispel completely. And each time she caught Daniel's gaze across a meeting table, her pulse betrayed her. reminding her of the truth she couldn't reveal. Daniel, for his part, seemed to sense the danger. In public, he treated her with the same professional respect he showed everyone else. He never lingered at her desk, never singled her out in meetings. But Eleanor felt the restraint in his every movement, the way he kept a careful distance even as his eyes betrayed something deeper. One evening, as she gathered her things to leave, Clara called. Her younger sister's voice carried warmth, but also concern. "You sound exhausted," Clara said. "I'm fine," Eleanor replied, forcing cheer she didn't feel. "You've been fine for months." Fine doesn't fool me. What's really going on?" Eleanor hesitated. She wanted to spill everything, the kiss, the whispers, the fragile line she walked every day, but she bit it back. "Work's just busy. I'm proving myself." Clara sighed, but didn't push. "Just don't forget, proving yourself doesn't mean breaking yourself." After hanging up, Eleanor sat in the empty office for a moment longer, staring at the darkened skyline. Clara was right. She couldn't let gossip or jealousy break her stride. She had rebuilt her life once before, from ashes and doubt. She could do it again here on her own terms. The next morning, she returned with renewed resolve. When a partner questioned her figures, she defended them with steady confidence. When a colleague tried to undermine her presentation, she calmly dismantled his objections with facts. Bit by bit, the whispers began to shift. "She's actually good. Those numbers were airtight. Say what you will, but she gets results." It wasn't vindication, not yet, but it was the beginning of something more powerful than gossip. It was respect, and Eleanor clung to that, even as her heart remained tangled in feelings she couldn't quite admit aloud. The weeks that followed were some of the busiest of Eleanor Hayes's life. The firm had its eyes set on the Meridian Group, a national corporation with deep pockets and a reputation for being selective with its partnerships. Securing their business would mean millions in revenue and prestige for Prescott and Bell. The partners buzzed with nervous energy. Junior associates whispered about sleepless nights ahead, and even seasoned secretaries braced for chaos. Eleanor didn't flinch. She volunteered to lead the preparation team, organizing the research, coordinating the schedules, drafting outlines for presentations, and, when necessary, rewriting attorneys' jargon-heavy slides into something a human could actually understand. It was a daunting task. No one had expected her to raise her hand, least of all Margaret Doyle, who gave her a long, assessing look. "You're confident you can manage this?" Margaret asked. "Yes," Eleanor replied simply. Margaret's lips pressed into the faintest smile. "Then prove it." And so she did. For weeks, Eleanor became the steady center of the storm. She arranged strategy sessions, mediated disputes between senior partners, and soothed tempers frayed by long nights. She created binders thick enough to stop a bullet, each one meticulously tabbed and color-coded. When lawyers stumbled over logistics, she caught the errors before they reached the client. The workload was grueling, but Eleanor thrived. For once, her long nights weren't about proving her worth to herself. They were about steering the entire firm toward success. Daniel, true to his word, stayed out of the spotlight. He attended a few preparation meetings, sitting quietly in the back, taking notes. Occasionally, Eleanor would catch his eyes on her, a flicker of pride there, but he never stepped in to override her, never tried to tip the scales in her favor. Instead, he let her lead. On the morning of the pitch, Eleanor woke before dawn. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting the navy blazer she had chosen carefully, steadying her breathing. This wasn't about Daniel. This wasn't about gossip or whispers. This was about her work, her vision, her chance to show that she was more than just a secretary with rumors trailing behind her name. At the office, the conference room had been transformed into a stage. Thick folders lined the table. Screens glowed with slides, and the air buzzed with nervous anticipation. Meridian's delegation arrived promptly at 9, a half-dozen executives in tailored suits, their expressions skeptical, the kind of clients used to being courted. The partners began their introductions, but it was Eleanor who set the tone. She welcomed the visitors, her voice steady, her words warm but professional. She laid out the agenda with clarity, then handed off to each speaker in turn. Whenever a partner stumbled, she smoothed the transition. When questions veered off course, she redirected gracefully. It was like conducting an orchestra. Every detail mattered. Every cue had to be precise. And Eleanor was the conductor. Halfway through, one of Meridian's executives challenged a key point in the proposal. The room stiffened. Attorneys shifted uncomfortably, but Eleanor stepped forward, binder in hand. "Allow me to clarify," she said, flipping to the relevant page. With calm precision, she explained the figures, acknowledged the concern, and reframed the data in a way that not only answered the objection, but highlighted an opportunity Meridian hadn't considered. The executive leaned back, impressed despite himself. Daniel, seated quietly at the far end of the room, allowed the faintest smile. By the end of the meeting, the Meridian delegation looked transformed, no longer skeptical, but intrigued. They shook hands firmly, offered compliments freely, and promised to follow up with final agreements soon. When the visitors left, the room exhaled as one. Partners clapped each other's backs, associates grinned with relief, and Margaret Doyle herself walked over to Eleanor. "Well done," Margaret said simply, but her eyes carried respect Eleanor had never seen before. Later that afternoon, word spread Meridian had chosen Prescott and Bell. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through the building. For once, the whispers weren't about scandal or speculation. They were about Eleanor Hayes. She carried that pitch. Did you see the way she handled that objection? She's not just a secretary, she's a force. That evening, Margaret summoned Eleanor to her office. "You've done more than anyone could have asked," Margaret said. "Your leadership in this deal has set a new standard for what we expect from our staff, which is why, effective immediately, I'm promoting you to Client Relations Coordinator. It's a newly expanded role. You'll oversee client-facing logistics for all major accounts." Eleanor blinked, stunned. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Margaret replied. Eleanor smiled slowly, the weight of months of work and doubt lifting from her shoulders. Yes. That night, as she walked home under the glow of street lamps, she allowed herself a rare indulgence pride. Not the fragile kind that crumbled under scrutiny, but the solid kind, earned through grit and resolve. And when her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, just 3 words, "Proud of you," she felt a warmth spread through her chest. For once, it wasn't complicated. It was just the truth. The promotion brought congratulations from every corner of Prescott and Bell. Partners nodded approvingly. Associates whispered admiration. And even the office gossip chain had little choice but to shift focus from rumors to results. But at home, in the quiet of her apartment, Eleanor felt the weight of something heavier than pride. Her younger sister, Clara, came by that Saturday afternoon, armed with a bottle of wine and her usual energy. Clara was everything Eleanor wasn't: spontaneous, impulsive, with laughter that filled a room. She dropped her coat on a chair, kicked off her boots, and sank into the couch with a grin. "So," Clara said, pouring them both glasses, "my big sister is officially climbing the ladder. Client Relations Coordinator. Huh, that's not a small step." Eleanor smiled faintly. "It's something," Clara scoffed. "It's huge. You pulled off the biggest client acquisition this firm has seen in years. You should be celebrating." "I am," Eleanor said softly, swirling her glass. "At least, I want to be." Clara's smile faded into curiosity. "What's wrong?" Eleanor hesitated, staring into the wine as though the answers might surface there. "It's not just the job. It's Daniel." Clara's eyebrows rose. "Ah, the mysterious Mr. Whitmore finally makes his way into the conversation." Eleanor let out a humorless laugh. "The rumors at work haven't stopped. Clara, no matter what I do, no matter how hard I prove myself, people still whisper that my success comes from him." Clara leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Do you care what they say?" "Yes," Eleanor admitted, her voice tight. Because I've lived through it before being defined by someone else, having my worth measured by who I was with instead of who I am. I can't bear the thought of being seen as some gold digger who seduced her way into a promotion. Clara studied her carefully. Eleanor, you are the least calculating person I know. If anything, you build walls so high that no one can get close enough to accuse you of using them. Do you really think anyone who matters believes those whispers? Eleanor's shoulders sagged. Perception matters. In an office like mine, whispers can ruin reputations. I worked too hard to let mine be reduced to pillow talk. Clara reached out, covering her sister's hand with her own. You sound like you're punishing yourself for caring about someone, as if love is a weakness. But Eleanor, love isn't weakness. It's risk. And yes, it's terrifying. But isn't it worse to live safe and lonely than to take a chance on something real? The words hit deeper than Eleanor wanted them to. She pulled her hand back gently, pacing the small living room. I don't know if I can trust myself. I don't know if I can trust him. He's powerful. Clara. He's used to being in control. How do I know I won't just become another part of his empire? Another asset he can acquire and manage? Clara tilted her head. Does he treat you like that? Eleanor stopped, thinking of the way Daniel had looked at her during meetings, the way he had stepped back during the Meridian deal and let her shine, the way his voice had cracked when he admitted how alone he felt. She swallowed hard. No, he doesn't. Then maybe, Clara said gently, the fear isn't about him. Maybe it's about what you went through before. You left a man who diminished you. You rebuilt yourself. And now, you're afraid that opening your heart again means erasing all that progress. But it doesn't. Not if this time it's different. Eleanor sat back down, her hands twisting in her lap. What if I'm wrong? What if I'm blinded by whatever this is? Attraction, attention, loneliness. What if I mistake it for love? Clara's voice softened, filled with that blend of pragmatism and warmth only a sister could manage. Then you'll survive, because you've already proven you can. Eleanor, you're stronger than you've ever been. That strength doesn't vanish just because you let someone close. It grows when you share it. Tears prickled at the corners of Eleanor's eyes, though she blinked them back. I want to believe that. I do. Clara squeezed her hand again. Then be brave enough to try. Real love doesn't come without fear, but fear doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means it's worth something. The apartment fell quiet, the ticking of the clock the only sound between them. Eleanor leaned back, closing her eyes. Clara's words echoed in her mind, battling with her own doubts. She had spent so long defining herself by resilience, by survival. Was it possible that letting someone in wasn't a betrayal of that strength, but an extension of it? Still, the whispers haunted her, the looks from colleagues, the suspicion in their eyes. She had promised herself she would never again let her worth be tied to a man, and yet here she was, heart tugged by the one man whose shadow loomed largest over her career. When Clara left later that evening, Eleanor stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. She pressed a hand to the glass, her reflection staring back, uncertain. Could she be brave enough to risk both her heart and her hard-earned pride? She didn't have the answer. Not yet. But she knew the question would not leave her alone. 6 months later, the transformation of Prescott and Bell was complete. The firm, once stiff and weary, now buzzed with an energy that mirrored its sleek new lobby and expanded client list. And at the center of it all, the annual gala was to be the crowning moment, an evening of polished speeches, glittering gowns, and champagne toasts. Eleanor Hayes stood in front of her bedroom mirror, fastening the clasp of a silver necklace Clara had loaned her for the occasion. The dress she wore was simple, navy silk that caught the light when she moved. She smoothed the fabric over her hips, inhaling slowly. It's just another event, she told herself, but her reflection knew better. Tonight mattered. Tonight. Daniel would be there not as the untouchable CEO, but as the man who had slowly, steadily dismantled the walls she had built around her heart. When she arrived at the ballroom, the air shimmered with soft music and the murmur of conversation. Chandeliers cast golden light over the crowd, reflecting off glasses of champagne and polished shoes. Eleanor felt eyes on her as she moved through the throng, curious, assessing, some admiring, others skeptical. She lifted her chin, refusing to shrink. Daniel was across the room, speaking with a cluster of board members. He wore a classic black tuxedo, and though the room was filled with powerful figures, he commanded it effortlessly. When his gaze finally found hers, a small, private smile tugged at his lips. The evening unfolded in a blur of greetings, polite conversations, and endless introductions. Eleanor held her own, gracious and composed, but her pulse quickened each time Daniel drew near. At last, the music softened, and Margaret Doyle, still serving as a senior advisor, took the stage. She tapped the microphone, quieting the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "tonight we celebrate not only a year of extraordinary growth, but a new chapter in the history of this firm. None of it would have been possible without the vision and leadership of our owner, Mr. Daniel Whitmore." Applause filled the ballroom as Daniel stepped onto the stage. He thanked Margaret with a handshake before turning to the crowd. "Good evening," he said, his voice resonant yet warm. "6 months ago, I stood in front of you and promised change, not reckless change, but thoughtful, deliberate steps to unlock the potential I saw in this firm. Tonight, looking around this room, I see that potential realized. Each of you has played a role in that success, and for that, I thank you." The audience responded with another round of applause. Eleanor watched, her heart swelling with something she dared not name. But then Daniel's tone shifted. His gaze swept the room before resting, unmistakably, on her. "There is one person in particular I must thank," he said, his voice steady. "Someone who reminded me that leadership is not about power, but about people. Someone whose strength, honesty, and courage have challenged me to become not just a better leader, but a better man." The room fell silent, heads turned, eyes following his line of sight toward Eleanor. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but she stood tall, refusing to flinch beneath the scrutiny. Daniel continued, "Eleanor Hayes, would you join me on stage?" Gasps rippled through the crowd as she stepped forward, her heels clicking against the polished floor. The music had stopped, leaving only the sound of her heartbeat pounding in her ears. When she reached him, Daniel took her hand gently, steadying her trembling fingers with his calm touch. He turned back to the audience, his voice ringing clear. "Tonight, I don't want to hide behind titles or rumors. Tonight, I want to speak plainly. This woman is not here because of whispers. She is here because of her brilliance, her courage, and the truth of what she means to me." The ballroom held its breath. Daniel released her hand only long enough to reach into his jacket pocket and retrieve a small velvet box. Then, before hundreds of witnesses, he lowered himself onto one knee. Eleanor's breath caught. The world seemed to narrow to a single point, the man kneeling before her, the ring glinting in his hand, the hush of the crowd waiting. "Eleanor Hayes," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "From the moment you challenged me over a cafe table, my world has not been the same. You have shown me what it means to be seen, truly seen, and to love without fear of power or pretense. You are the heart I never knew I was missing. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Eleanor's vision. She had sworn she would never let herself be defined by a man again, never surrender her hard-won independence. And yet, in this moment, she understood this wasn't surrender. This was partnership. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Yes, Daniel Whitmore. 1,000 times. Yes." Applause exploded, rising like thunder as Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to kiss her. It was not the tentative kiss of stolen moments, but a public declaration, soft, reverent, and full of the promise of a shared future. When they finally broke apart, the crowd still clapping and cheering, Eleanor felt her fears dissolve into something steady, something real. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was living. The applause from the gala echoed in Eleanor's ears long after the lights had dimmed and the crowd had dispersed. The ring glimmered on her finger, heavy not with gold, but with meaning. Yet even as joy swelled in her chest, another voice stirred quietly within her, the voice that had carried her through heartache, divorce, and rebuilding. Don't lose yourself. Later that night, as the ballroom emptied and the last of the champagne glasses were cleared, Eleanor and Daniel found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the hotel's terrace. The city stretched out below, twinkling under the stars, the hum of traffic softened by distance. Daniel turned to her, his eyes warm, vulnerable in a way she had rarely seen. I know tonight was a lot. I wanted to show the world what you mean to me. But if it overwhelmed you, Eleanor placed a hand on his arm, steady but firm. It wasn't too much. It was honest. And I'll always choose honesty over shadows. But Daniel, we need to be clear about something. He nodded, bracing himself. Anything. My career, Eleanor said, her voice unwavering. Everything I've built these past years, the long nights, the cases I managed, the promotion I earned, it's mine. Not because of you, not because of us, but because of me. I can't let anyone, not even you, take that away. Daniel's expression softened, relief flickering across his features. I would never want to. Eleanor, your strength is what drew me to you in the first place. The last thing I want is to overshadow it. She studied him, searching his face for any sign of patronizing, any hint of the arrogance she had endured before. Instead, she saw sincerity etched in the lines around his eyes, in the curve of his mouth. I need to hear you say it, she pressed, that you'll never use your power to hand me victories I haven't earned, or to protect me from struggles I should face myself, that whatever we build together, my achievements will still be mine. Daniel reached for her hand, gently tracing the new ring with his thumb. I promise, no shortcuts, no interference. You'll rise on your own. Eleanor, just as you always have. And I'll be the one standing beside you, cheering louder than anyone else. Her chest loosened, tension melting away. For months she had feared becoming invisible in someone else's shadow again. Now, for the first time, she believed she wouldn't have to. They stood in silence for a while, the night air cool, the city alive beneath them. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice thoughtful. We've both fought so hard to stand where we are. You with your resilience, me with my ambition. Maybe now it's time we build something not just for ourselves, but together. Eleanor tilted her head, intrigued. Together, how he smiled faintly. I've spent years expanding companies, chasing deals, measuring success by numbers on a screen. But what if our future isn't just about my empire? What if it's about creating a life where your dreams matter as much as mine, where we build a partnership not just in love, but in everything? Her heart stirred. For so long, she had carried her battles alone, shouldering the burden of independence like armor. The thought of sharing it not as surrender, but as balance was both terrifying and exhilarating. What would that look like, she asked. Daniel turned toward the cityscape, his voice steady. It looks like compromise. Like me stepping back from the constant grind, so I can actually be present. Like you pursuing the career you deserve, without me trying to smooth the way. It looks like a future where power doesn't separate us, it strengthens us. Eleanor let his words settle, the cool night wrapping around her. Slowly, she nodded. If we're going to do this, Daniel, it can't be about you saving me or me proving myself to you. It has to be about respect. Always. He met her gaze, his own eyes shining. Always. And with that single word, a weight lifted. The path ahead would not be without challenges. Whispers would continue. Critics would question, and they would stumble as all couples did. But in that moment, Eleanor believed they had the foundation to withstand it. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. For once, she allowed herself to imagine not just the battles, but the peace that might come after them, the mornings shared over coffee, the quiet evenings where work didn't dominate every thought, the steady rhythm of building a life not just for survival, but for joy. "Then let's build it," she said softly. Daniel kissed the top of her head, his arm wrapping around her in a gesture of protection that didn't feel suffocating, but freeing. "Together," he whispered. As the city stretched out before them, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years, not just pride, not just determination, but hope, real, unguarded hope. And for the first time, she believed that she could have both the independence she had fought for and the love she had almost been too afraid to claim. 1 year later, the cafe on the corner still held its place in Eleanor Hayes's morning routine. The same corner table, the same notebook, the same steady cup of coffee that grounded her before the storm of each workday, yet everything around her and within her had changed. She looked out the window, watching the city stir awake. People hurried past with umbrellas, phones pressed to ears, briefcases swinging in rhythm with their strides. It reminded her of who she had been a year ago, cautious, guarded, defined by survival rather than hope. Now, her life carried a different kind of weight. Prescott and Bell was thriving under Daniel's leadership, but it was no longer only about him. The changes he had implemented, the training programs, the wellness initiatives, the investments in staff had taken root. The culture of the firm was stronger, healthier, and Eleanor, now respected as client relations director, had become one of its cornerstones. Her colleagues no longer whispered, or if they did, their words carried a different tone. She was no longer the secretary who caught the boss's eye. She was the woman who had secured Meridian, who had earned her promotion, who had proven time and again that her place was built on competence and vision. Respect had replaced gossip. At home, life with Daniel was steady, sometimes chaotic, often imperfect, but real. They argued, as all couples do, about late nights at the office, about boundaries between work and home, about the future they were still shaping. But their arguments always circled back to the same place: respect. Daniel kept his promise. He never interfered with her work, never used his influence to pad her accomplishments. Instead, he championed her independence, encouraging her when she doubted herself, stepping back when she needed space, showing up when she needed support. And Eleanor, for her part, allowed herself something she once thought impossible to lean, not in surrender, not in weakness, but in trust. She no longer feared that loving him meant losing herself. Instead, she had discovered that love, when rooted in respect, deepened her strength. One evening, after a long day, she and Daniel sat on their balcony overlooking the city, glasses of wine in hand, laughter soft between them. He had turned to her with a quiet confession. "I used to think power meant never needing anyone," he said. "Now I know power means having the courage to share life with someone who sees you not your title, not your wealth, but you." Eleanor had smiled, leaning into him. "And I used to think independence meant carrying everything alone. Now I know independence means choosing who's worthy to carry it with you." It was those kinds of moments, small and unscripted, that defined their love. Not the grand gestures, not the headlines, not even the dazzling ring on her finger, but the quiet honesty of two people building something together, brick by brick, word by word. As Eleanor sipped her coffee now, she thought about how far she had come. She thought of the frightened woman she had once been, wary of love, mistrustful of power, unwilling to risk her heart again. And she thought of the woman she had become, still cautious, still strong, but open enough to embrace what life had placed unexpectedly in her path. She smiled, closing her notebook. Love, she realized, was not about being rescued. It was not about power, or money, or status. It was about integrity, about two people standing side by side, equal in dignity, transparent in truth, respectful of each other's light. And in that balance, she had found something worth all the fear, all the risk, all the whispers and doubts. She had found home. Eleanor's story reminds us that true strength is not found in building walls, but in knowing when to let them down. Many of us, especially after heartbreak or betrayal, learn to protect ourselves so fiercely that we mistake isolation for independence. Yet, as Eleanor discovered, resilience and love are not opposites. They can grow side by side. Her journey with Daniel shows that love built on power, secrets, or convenience cannot last. But love grounded in equality, respect, and transparency has the power to transform not only two lives, but entire communities. It is never about being saved, nor about surrendering one's identity. It is about standing tall beside someone who sees your worth, not above or beneath them, but eye to eye. For those of us who have lived long enough to know the weight of disappointment, this story offers hope. It reminds us that it is never too late to choose love again, this time with clearer boundaries, deeper wisdom, and a stronger sense of self. Because the most enduring partnerships are not built on wealth or status, but on mutual respect and the courage to be truly seen. Thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing in Eleanor's journey of strength, love, and integrity. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to life, stories that remind us of the courage and hope we all carry within. We can't wait to see you in the next story. Until then, stay shining.